Is everyone able to see the screen?
We can see it.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're going to get started. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This is Wakanda Forever, an intergenerational equity framework, and it is part of 2021 Civic Leadership Webinar Series. I do want to thank our sponsors, of course, Everyday Democracy. Zoya Sagasi and I work for this great organization, and Anti as well. And we may also have a couple of other colleagues of Everyday Democracy joining us. Of course, this is part of the Connecticut Civic Ambassadors Program. So we welcome all of you Civic Ambassadors to be part of this great event. And we do want to thank the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, which gave us a grant that enables us to do all these great learning exchanges and webinars. And so we hope you will enjoy this workshop and learn from it a great deal. I want to thank you for being part of it. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague. Our trainer today is Matthew Sagacity Walker, and he's the program associate, right, Sagacity? That's your title?
Yes, program manager. Well, actually, no, it's program manager now.
Program manager, that's right. They did change it. And Matthew, Sagacity, I call him Sagacity, is our trainer. He does some great work with anchors, with our partners, with organizations. And he's one of the co-framers of this framework. He's one of the people that worked on this framework from the very beginning, and he's been doing some great trainings with different kinds of organizations all over the country. So we are going to be learning from the man himself, who was one of the creators of this fantastic framework. So I'll turn it over to you, Sagacity.
Right. Thank you, Val. Every time you introduce me, I get super humbled. So forgive me right now as
You deserve it, man. You deserve
it. Super appreciate you, Val. Really, really. And speaking of appreciation, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out my colleague and friend Milana Rogers-Burson, because she was a really strong force and primary factor in moving the intergenerational equity framework forward. When Everyday Democracy started thinking about this, she was one of the people who really put this framework together, did a retreat with a bunch of young people and people who work with young people across the country for a weekend, and they sat in a room and, tossed ideas back and forth. So the framework that I'm going to be showing you all today comes directly from that retreat. So this is not just something I sat down in a room all by myself and, conjured up. And I do want to see, before we begin an engagement, I do want to make sure that if you're able to put on your video, please put on your video so we can all see one another. I'm going to try to make this as interactive as possible, and it helps with the level of engagement, and also being able to see, who's turning on their mic, who's turning off the mic, etc. So if you can, that would be great. If you cannot, no pressure. I just appreciate you all for being here. So before we go, though, I do want to do a round, because we should have a decent amount of time, is just to say a really quick introduction, say your name and where you're checking in from. So I'll model. My name is Sagacity Walker, and I'm checking in from Hartford, Connecticut. And I'll pass it to the first person I see, which is Zoya.
Thanks, Sagacity. I'm Zoya, and I'm checking in from West Hartford, Connecticut. And I'll pass it along to Taylor.
Hey everyone, super excited to be here. My name is Taylor, my pronouns are he, him, and I am checking in from West Hartford, Connecticut. And Val, I will pass it to you.
Yes, thank you, Taylor. I'm Val Ramos. I'm Director of Strategic Alliances at Everyday Democracy, and I'm the coordinator of the Connecticut Civic Ambassadors, and I'm delighted to be here. And I'll pass it on to, let me see who else is here. Anti.
Hi, I'm Antai Bilgatai. I am with Everyday Democracy as well. I am the Senior Director of Development. I'm happy to be here. I will pass it on to Elizabeth Acosta.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Sorry.
It's all right.
I'm Elizabeth. I am checking in from Ashford, Connecticut. I'm an adult education teacher out here.
Okay. Thank you. You want to pick the next person to go, please?
Oh, let's see. How about Patty? Patty? No Patty?
All right. We'll just keep it. Oh, yeah, here we go. Nope. We'll just keep it moving and pick another person.
Okay,
please.
how about Antonia Edwards?
Hey, my name is Antonia Edwards. I'm just getting in from a dental appointment, so I'm trying to get my phone up. I'm calling in from Manchester, and I'm a part of the Civic and the Ambassadors.
All right, King, thank you and welcome. You want
Thank
to
you.
pass it off to the last person we have to go is Naisha. I don't know if Naisha can hear me. Not, that's all right. And let me, all right. So we'll get going to hear news from somebody. Antonia, could you please mute your phone? Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. So as we're going to get going, and for this piece, if you are able to see the reactions at the bottom of your screen, I'd like you to react. I have a series of questions that I will be asking you all, and I just want to get some quick feedback, to sort of help us get context into why Everyday Democracy believes in the intergenerational equity framework and why it's important to include that in the work that we do. So my first question, and if you just raise your hand if this applies to you, if not, it's okay. So do you acknowledge at least one person who has changed your perspective on something? Has there ever been a time when a young person has changed your perspective on something? All right. See some hands coming up. Gravy. So the next one is, do you acknowledge at least one elder who has changed your perspective on something? At least one time an elder person has changed your perspective on something. All right, seeing thumbs up, hands up. So have you ever felt that you were not valued because of your age? Have you ever felt that you were not valued because of your age? Oh, wow, this is a great group. Y'all never had that. I got one. Alrighty. And please raise your hand if you've been involved in your community or some type of community work while you were in high school. All right. A couple of hands raised. And raise your hand if you ever had to stand up to injustice when you were young. Hands raised. All right. So this is the importance of why we do the intergenerational equity framework and why we believe in integrating that into the work that we do, because we all have learned from elder people. We've all learned from young people. Many of us, when we were young or as we get older, or we know older people have not been appreciated for their age, right? And we're trying to make sure that we combat that as we combat racial injustices and inequities and make our communities a better place. So this is the last question I have, because this is the most important one. Raise your hand if you have seen the movie Black Panther. All right, see a few hands raised. So for those who have not seen Black Panther, I do have a quick synopsis just so you have a decent understanding of what the film was about. I do encourage you all to see it. One of the reasons why we use that as a reference point for this is because I'm a super big Marvel Cinematic movie fan. So I do enjoy those comic book movies a lot. So it really was, for me, it was merging two of my favorite things, which is community work and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So really quickly, the Black Panther is about a country in Africa called Wakanda, right? It's a fictitious African country that's untouched by colonialism. And they have a certain mineral there that provides them with advanced technology. So the Black Panther has just become the king of the country after his father's death. And his cousin, who also has a claim to the throne, was raised in Oakland, California. And as we all know, Oakland has been very touched by colonialism. So because he has this claim to the throne, what he wants to do is he wants to get that power and get the technology from Wakanda to overthrow Western civilization. And then he'll be sort of the king of the world. So as Black Panther confronts his cousin about being the king of the country, he also has to decide what type of king he wants to be for his country. So that's sort of the long and the short of the movie. And I think there's a whole bunch of different aspects that happen. But I did want to go through that just so you have a decent background on where we're going. So Everyday Democracy finds intergenerational equity important, and we think of it as practicing and treating everyone fairly and justly regardless of age, right? So when we think of equity, we think of fairness and we think of justice. It's not necessarily about being equality, but it's about giving people what they need and what they deserve in order to be successful, right? And in order to do that, we take structural factors into consideration whenever we do any type of work. And then it's all about building strong relationships, right? And many of you all, I'm sure you all have do your own work in your own way, but as we all know, relationships are very vital to anything that we do. And in order to build these strong relationships and build intergenerational equity, thinking about how we share power across generations, right? How do we build relationships and mentorships for elder people and younger people, and specifically making space for youth voice, so that way they can develop their strengths as elder folks sort of retire out, and how do we pass the baton to the next generation? So that's very important for everyday democracy, and that's what we're trying to practice with this. So the first principle of our intergenerational equity framework is equitable decision-making power. And we think of equitable decision-making power in terms of across different age groups. So when we think about it, the first question you want to ask yourself is who is making the decisions, right? And then who is going to be most affected by the decisions, right? We think about things like climate change and the environment, and that's going to affect younger people to a greater degree than it will be the elders and people who are aging out. So when we have these types of conversations, are we including young people in that conversation? And not just are we including them for tokenism, but are we including them in making sure that their voice has a lot of power at the table as well? And we represent this principle with Okoye from the film, who was a general of the Wakandan army. And there was a scene in the film where they needed to just make a decision as a country on whether they were going to go get this war criminal. And in that scene, they had different people from different tribes as representatives, and they had an elder person from the tribe paired up with a young person from the tribe. And that's how they made the decision, right? It was the group making the decision together with the elder person and the younger person as the pair from each individual tribe. So that's why we use that. And also, anytime I move from principle to principle, I am going to go through this pretty quickly because I do want us to get into the conversation piece. But are there any questions, comments? I do want to give space for that as we move from principle to principle. So any thoughts, ideas, questions about equitable decision-making power and how do we create those type of spaces? All right, I'll let that sit. And also there is a framework, if you are not familiar with it already, we do actually have a document on our website, and I'll provide the link for that later on. So the next principle that we like to talk about is intergenerational learning. And this is big because it's all about learning happening across the generations, right? It's not just elder people mentoring and teaching young people what they can do or what they should be doing, but also understanding that young people have a lot of experience and a lot of opinions that we need to take into consideration as we move towards the future, right? As we do that, we also honor the wisdom of the elders. And when I'm talking about learning from young people, I am talking about getting beyond asking young people to set up your Zoom, to set up the PowerPoint, to do some sort of technology thing, right? They also have ideas outside of smartphones. So being very clear around that. And we represent this principle with the character Shuri, who was a young person from Wakanda. She's the princess of Wakanda, in fact, and she sort of is the head of the science and technology as the country grows. So that's why we represent it with her. And I have this clip from the movie, which sort of exemplifies the importance of young voices. I want to make sure, can you all hear that?
There's no sound.
Oh, Lord Jesus. All right. So if that is the case, what I'll do is I'll just summarize the video. How about that? All right. So in this video, the Black Panther has just come back from a mission, and he has this weapon, and she says, how did they work? He says they work perfectly. And then she says, okay, great, because I have some upgrades I want to make to them. He said, but I just told you they worked perfectly. So her response is, just because something works does not mean it cannot be improved, right? So sometimes we've been doing things the same old way for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, whatever have you. How many times has that come up, whether it be in the organization or in the community, saying we've always done it this way, right? But there's always space and room for improvement. And that's one of the things that we need to take into consideration as we move towards the future, right? Our world is changing, our society is changing. So who better to take advice from than younger people who are actually going through this change in real time? If I could skip this. So the next one is addressing structural racism. So as many of you probably already know, right, structural racism is embedded in the United States history, right? When we think about Jim Crow, slavery, Japanese internment camps, even, what's going on right now with Georgia and voting, right? We're thinking about the trial that's going on right now, right? So institutional and structural racism is something that is a part of our culture. So in order for us to move forward, we're going to have to sort of get past this, the D&I framework and models that we're trying to use, right? Those are good for individual changes, but if we don't change the systems and the structures that control, whether it be our local community or our states or, federally, that cross the state lines, then we're not really going to be we're not going to be making as big a change as we possibly could. And also taking into consideration that, our communities are becoming much more diverse. So as our communities become much more diverse and there's many more Black and brown people, we need to make sure that we address the structural inequities that have been holding people of color back for so long. And when we do this, we also think about the intersection of racism and adultism and how they both come into play in terms of the work that we do on a daily basis. So that would be our third principle. And again, I have another video that represents this with the character Killmonger. This is the guy who's trying to take over the throne in the film. And there's a scene where his father, who had moved to Oakland, and that's how he had a child out there, he had moved to Oakland and he realized all of the hardships that Black people in America and around the world have been going through because they have not had the privilege of not being touched by colonialism. They don't have the privilege of having this great technology and they're seeing their subjugation. So now what he wants to do is sort of overthrow the government. And that's the reason why Killmonger was inspired to move forward and change the way things are for people of color across the world. Any questions, comments about structural racism or how we could possibly incorporate that more into our work? We're definitely going to have more time to talk about these in a bit. So. All right. And if anything comes up, please feel free to add comments into the chat. All right. And the next one is collective leadership and the importance of collective leadership and valuing the skills and voices of people, no matter what their age, right? Sometimes we say that young people don't have a voice or what they're saying isn't as important and they don't have the skills or knowledge yet to make decisions. But, if you look at high school students, even junior high school students or whatever have you, they do have knowledge and skills that can be applied in many different areas. And it's figuring out how do we tap into that knowledge? How do we tap into their experience? How are we able to utilize their skills, right? And then also honoring different forms of leadership and being able to actually share power with one another. Because as you all know, given the way our culture works is once somebody has power, it's very difficult to share it with people that we would view as beneath us or someone we view as inexperienced or whatever have you, right? But if we're trying to learn and grow from one another, it is very important for us to think of it in terms of, sharing power and helping building that next generation of leadership. And this is the last principle here, and this is sustainability, because we're very big about long-term work and the long-term effects of our work, right? So when we think about how are we going to continue our work and not thinking of the work that we do as looking at, these one-off events or one-off projects, but thinking of how does this project lead to something greater? How does this project lead to more equitable outcomes? How does this event lead to addressing structural racism? All of these different things. And then how do we build caring communities? I was talking to one of my neighbors This was a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that they had mentioned was they live in an apartment building, and somebody, their neighbor upstairs or whatever have you, was playing music really loud. So they knocked on the neighbor's door and asked him to turn the music down, and the person scoffed at him and was like, "I'll keep my music playing as loud as I want to." And I was telling my neighbor about this, and I was saying, is this your first time speaking to the person who played their music loud? Because if the first time speaking to your neighbor is, coming from inconvenience, now there's no relationship there for them to say, "Oh, you know what? I'm being a bother. Let me turn my music down," right? How do we build caring communities before there is an issue, right? We're always ready to come together whenever there's an atrocity or whatever have you, but sustainability requires that we build the relationships in to help with the long-term effects, which lead to long-term community actions. And we represented that with the main character of the film, the Black Panther, who at the end of the movie, what this video would have been, skip this one. At the end of the movie, what he decides to do is, after he defeats his cousin for the throne, he decides that he wants to go back to Oakland and open up, an outreach center, right? And he's going to start opening up outreach centers all over the world and showing people that, Wakanda does have this technology. We do have things that we can share with the world, but we're not going to dominate the world, right? We want to see what we can build with one another. And that's sort of one of the main reasons why we use this film as an example of intergenerational equity and why we need to address structural racism, why we need to build more collective leadership, and why we need to have equitable decision-making power, et cetera, because without those, we're not going to actually build strong communities as strong as they could be. So that's the main piece of my presentation. The next piece that I wanted to do is going to get into us speaking with one another and having more of a conversation. So if you were the type of person who thought you were just going to come and listen to me speak for an hour, that's not the way this is going to happen. So at this point in time, we can take ourselves off of mute, and what I'm going to do is share a document that I did create for us to use today. If you have access to Google Docs, I could put the link in the chat so you can look at the document as we work through this. Here we go. Let me know if you're actually able to open it. And if there's an issue, we can get to that. All right, I'm seeing head nods. All right. So what I wanted to do now was, we like to, when Bilal and I usually do this, and when I've done this on my own, I'd like to sort of get a feel for the room and see what people's experiences with these have been, and what are some of the things that we can do as we improve, right? So as you can see, for each of the principles, they each have a page in a different table or a chart. And the main thing I want to do now is, on one side, is talk about what's going well in the work that you're doing, so that way we could learn about what one another is doing, in our core work, in our core community work, but then also thinking of opportunities that we can grow and that we can change in as they relate to each one of these principles. Does that sound okay with you all? All right, great. So right now, again, please feel free to take yourself off of mute. And what we'll do is we'll just walk through them one by one, beginning with the first one, equitable decision-making. And we'll begin with the positives on what's going well. So just feel free to jump in.
Hi. I just want to say that I have a grassroots organization, and I do a lot of legislation work, and we testify a lot. And I just find that we don't really have a lot of reception from the community, and we would really love to have the youth get involved. So my partner and I have been on just about every hearing that affects the Black community, and it would really be nice to hear from the younger generation. So nothing's going well right now, other than the fact that we're on behalf of people that aren't really speaking for themselves. So we did Desegregation Connecticut, and that's going to really affect the youth going forward. And we also did racism as a public health crisis. And so we just really need, people to come and speak up. It just helps us, and it helps the situation here in Connecticut. So I would say nothing's going well right now, other than the fact that we have exposure. However, it's not a combined effort. It's not. We're just speaking for everybody and not knowing what they really want.
All right, great. So what I'm gonna do, if you don't mind, Antonia, and I hope you all are okay with this too, is I'm gonna write a note to come back to that. So possibly we could even share ideas with one another with Antonia about what are some of the things that she can do to, recruit more young people to help out, right? Because that's sort of what we would like to do here. I'm gonna write that down right now. Anything else that folks would like to add on? Anything going well with inviting young people with equitable decision making?
Do you want us to type it into that document?
I'd actually rather you just say it aloud. I can type it and take the notes, so then that way you can focus on what it is that you're saying. And I really want this to be more of a you all being able to connect with one another. But if you feel more comfortable writing, I'm open to that too.
So I guess this is more, of a national stage issue that I kind of am thinking about in this context. So there's a lot of anti-trans youth bills happening all over the country right now. And so I would say what's going well is that there are a lot of youth obviously speaking because it's about them. There's also a lot of trans adults and just allies who are calling, whether it's their state government or not, who are really trying to support, our vulnerable trans kids in our community. And it's not at the moment there is legislation in Connecticut, but it hasn't really moved yet in any public hearing or anything like that. But I would say that for me is the first thing, especially on trans data visibility, that comes to mind when I think about kind of what's going well, I guess.
Thank you for that. Right. And the need for the adult allies, right? That's very important. Please forgive my spelling too. If you're looking at me type into the boxes here, don't judge me. I'm actually integrated. Any other thoughts about what's going well? Anything that you've done or seen that works well to
I think one thing that's working well is that youth often feel empowered to use social media and different online resources as a way to voice their concerns and talk about the causes that they care about. But to that same point, I feel like it's very easy to kind of shut that out of the conversation. And so something that needs to be improved is really using that and acknowledging that as a platform that the youth use to convey their ideas.
Oh yeah. Before we get going, moving on to the next one, is there any last thoughts, comments on equitable decision making regarding what's going well or things that we could improve on? Just want to make sure I give everybody a moment. So I'll scroll down to our next one, which is intergenerational learning. So any ideas, thoughts, or examples of things that are going well in terms of cross-generational learning? Again, this is spaces where young people are sharing their information and knowledge with elders and where elders are sharing their information and knowledge with young people.
Okay, I like to say that I have a younger person as a partner on purpose. I'm saying he's in his 30s, I'm 55. We share everything on every social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, everything. It's not that. I just think that the younger generation doesn't take the things that we're talking about as serious, and they really affect them. Like, affordable housing, being able to live wherever you want in Connecticut. So I think that we try our best to include everybody. And I think that if they did a little more research on the things like the bills that are going through, they do affect them, you're saying the generations to come. And we're just trying to pave the way for them. So we're very versed as far as social media and everything. we're just trying to figure out what can we do to get more of attention from them, because it's just not working. We don't know what to do. You know, colleges, we dropped our flyers. You know, we done everything. We've tried to touch, you know, reach everybody to see how we incorporate them, because this is a big legislation year in Connecticut, especially with last year being closed. And there was a lot of things that the youth or the younger generation could have capitalized off of, could have been involved with. And we just wanted to make sure everybody had access to the information. It's not that easy to find. So we just don't know what to do. And that's why I'm on this call, to find out what more can we do to assist.
Great.
Can I just share a personal story? I had a very powerful experience with a young person that I mentored professionally. He was a student teacher in my class. And I just, you know, I don't know why, but perhaps because my work is primarily focused on adults, I didn't realize how little contact I have with young people. And it was just such a refreshing experience. I was in awe of that young person. I mean, it was as if his brain, it was almost like at a cellular level. He brought so much to the work. Just to make a long story short, I advocated for him to be hired, and he is now one of our new teachers on the team.
Great.
So.
Perfect example.
I'm actually going to use an example of a coalition that actually, you know, Zoya and I both sit on, and I think that's a really good example of. We have 3 current grad students on it, and the rest are older, you know, professionals, and I would say they really value our input, and that's something that I'm really thankful for. Zoya and I ourselves are running part of our program. Like, there's a lot of just trust within learning in both spaces. And so I say, like you mentioned, it's not just the Zoom stuff. It's like they're asking for what we're seeing, you know, what are college students asking for, you know, what are youth asking for. And I'm also learning, you know, we're learning just as much about other things that, you know, right now in school we don't have access to, or, you know, we don't have as much, like, we're not ability in class to go in depth on every single thing about what it's like to work in a coalition, you know, or how to ask for financial support, like all of these different nitty gritty on the job training stuff. You know, we're really having, I would say, a lot of learning up and down the generational ladder, which, you know, I'm very thankful for.
Great. Perfect example. Anything else before we move on? Oh, and just in case, I do want to make sure, is everybody actually able to see this? Because the notes that I'm taking, because if not, I can also just screen share it if anyone has any issues seeing it. All right, I'm seeing a head nod, so I'm going to assume that that means you can see it. You know, my mother told me about assuming things years ago. The first 3 letters never work. All right. So moving on to the next principle here is addressing structural racism. Right. So thinking of ways that we either are currently or addressing this issue, or what can be improved around addressing structural racism. Any thoughts or ideas around that? Experiences as well. We're very welcome.
Well, for me, I'm really big on dismantling racism, and especially here in Connecticut. There's a lot of denial here in Connecticut. I come from Boston, which was very racist, and so we got through that. And so being here in Connecticut and seeing that it still exists and people are in denial really hurts my feelings. It really bothers me. So any opportunity I get to testify, I do so. So I keep mentioning the 2 bills that were really important. DC, Connecticut, the Black and minority populations only live in 3 counties out of the 8 here, and there's a clear systematic oppression and racism to keep minorities out of those other areas. And then also with the bill now 6662, which is racism as a public health crisis, it's really at an all-time high. So much so that Senator Anwar is a doctor, and he noticed it, and that's why he submitted the bill. So I really try to educate all facets of life, everybody, to let them know that this stuff needs to be addressed, and the more people that are on it, the better it is. And so I don't want it to be the bills are passed and recommendations are made, and everybody's input's not in it. That's the most important thing. And then when we look up, it's like, oh, well, I didn't know this was going on, or I didn't have a chance to voice my opinion. So that's really key for me. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm into civic engagement. I'm in legislation, is to fight for the underdog. I started off with disabled children, and I still do that, but I'm really focused on dismantling the racism in Connecticut.
Cool beans. Thank you, Antonia.
Antonia, I want to second that. One, on everything you said, but also the getting involved with legislation, because I've testified multiple times. It's something I kind of run for students at UConn, is how to teach UConn Hartford, but social work students to show up in their legislative power and how to testify, how to submit testimony. And I think you made an excellent point about it is very difficult to navigate that system, and there is not a lot of transparency. But I also think, when we look at structural racism, I mean, it's everywhere. We know that. And also I'm looking at the way we vote in Connecticut is a perfect example. Like, I have submitted multiple testimonies and supported multiple different things on expansion of voter rights. No absentee or no excuse absentee ballot and no early voting ballot in Connecticut is absurd, in my opinion. And we know who it centers, and we know who it, purposely disenfranchises. So I really want to definitely echo what you said and mention just all the structural systems in Connecticut. While they have the ability to be changed, people are dragging their feet, and they need to know. Like you mentioned, the more people that know, the more people that show up, the more that the constituents have collective power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm relatively new.
Sorry, what was that, Antonia?
I was thanking Taylor for that acknowledgement. Thank you.
Okay, definitely. Okay.
I just want to say I'm relatively new to Connecticut as well, and I think that the structural racism is compounded by the fact that the 169 towns tend to remain 169 separate geographic entities. And I think what can be improved is communication between the different towns in Connecticut, and bringing people together across city lines, just to build more community outside of the individual cities.
Yes, that's an important observation, because the importance of looking at structural systemic racism, institutional racism, because young people are impacted by this very directly. So, for example, of course, classroom size.
Yes.
Example,
Yes.
education. Also, school discipline. We know for a fact that especially young Black girls are disciplined in disproportionate higher numbers than any other students, generally speaking. So I think those are two particular examples. And so young people's voices are important, because they are the ones who can tell us really what impact these things are having in their lives. They're all also impacted, of course, by peer pressure, impacted by substance abuse, mental health, and so many different issues that young people are facing, and that the best way to really address and work with them is to listen to them, for them to have a voice and be heard, because they have something important to tell us about that. So and many times that's tied to racism, especially with students of color in our public schools, but even in our community college, and sometimes in our universities as well.
Definitely. Right. And as it keeps, because and this is what structural racism is, right? It's separating us by our geographic locations, right? Whether it be by the counties, by the towns, et cetera. And then, how does that affect schools? How does that affect the teachers that work for the schools? How does that affect the payment for the teachers, classroom size, discipline, all those different things, right? And it just feeds out, But then that, I don't want to jump too far ahead, because I do want to get back to, the recruitment and building that collective power that folks are beginning to touch on here. So before I do that, anything else on structural racism, particularly anything that's, going well, or, rays of hope?
Where I work, I feel that they're taking this more seriously. They're actually going to be bringing in a trainer to work with all of the teaching staff. And the trainer will be on for an entire semester, which I think is absolutely wonderful. So I just feel like it's not a one-time meeting anymore, like a webinar or a training. I feel that institutions are starting to kind of not be so afraid to deconstruct the structural racist practices that they've had, or look at them without that fear factor. I feel like they're starting to kind of say, you know what, we need to look at these better.
Yes. Right. I'll sort of second that too, because I've noticed that as well. Because especially given all that's happened this last year, Everyday Democracy, because we have been doing racial equity work for so long, a lot more places have been reaching out to us than, I gave Antai a report on this a few months ago, and we've had like double the amount of calls in, 5 months than we have all year in 2019. You know what I mean? Because that many people want to work on racial equity. And one of the big things, I'm happy you brought this up, Elizabeth, is now people aren't just saying, let's do training on racial equity. You come in for a day or you do a workshop for a couple of hours and that be it. It's like, no, this has to be long-term. And a lot of the people I know who do this racial equity work, D&I work, et cetera, they are starting to say, if you really believe in this work, we're going to have to make a long-term commitment about this. And then at the end of that long-term commitment, we're going to have to be looking at the policies and the practices and the procedures that feed into racism being perpetuated in any way, shape, or form, right? So that way, a lot of people who are saying that they want to do the training or whatever have you, we're sort of holding their feet to the fire a lot more now than we did even 5 years ago. Definitely.
And that's a good point, Sagacity, because going back to schools, for example, and disciplining, some schools have school resource officers. And many of these folks are not really trained to engage with young people. And the first thing they do is they criminalize them. They immediately, their behavior or their way they're being gets criminalized, they get suspended. And what happens is that they lose opportunities to continue learning and they get labeled and stigmatized. It's just a perpetual process and procedures and practices that perpetuate these disadvantages that are in many cases are rooted in lack of communication, lack of really engaging with the young person in a constructive way. And it reminds me of procedural justice as an approach that can be used to engage school resource officers in trainings through which they can learn those skills.
Definitely. And then Taylor did add in the chat, right? More RSO than social workers, the school resource officers than social workers in schools, And even that, the work that I've done with different school systems and districts and individual schools, you'll have a school social worker, but they have, 300 people that they have to see, So even though you have a social worker in school, how are they actually going to do something that's strong and meaningful?
Right. And I think a lot of this obviously comes down to priority, right? Like, because we as a culture, as a system, as the United States, like our morals are written into our budgets. At the end of the day, like you can all day say what you care about, but if you're not funding what you care about, your priorities are very clear. And I think that's really what we're getting to ahead with Connecticut, is because on the outside, we look very progressive and we put up a wonderful front of progressiveness. And it's not to say that we aren't in some areas, because I do, we owe credit to the places that we are, but also I feel as though our budget and morals are where, we're really starting to get to ahead and say, okay, like this is what you're saying, then you also need to fund it.
Definitely. So before I move on, I just want to see any other thoughts on that before we move to collective leadership. Before I start to explain, anything else on how we can address racism or how we currently are? So with collective leadership, anything that's going well or any area for improvement around that? Again, collective leadership about how do we build a network of leaders, and understanding that we all are going to be playing different roles and honoring and respecting the different roles that we all have to play in our movement. Certain things that are going well.
So, Sagacity, one organization that comes to my mind because I had a chance to attend one of their meetings with young people was Compass. What's the name of the organization? Compass Peace Mind?
Compass. I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
forget the name.
Youth
Peace Builders.
Collaborative.
Peace Builders.
Collaborative. Yeah.
Mhm.
Peace Builders, yes, the collaborative. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, they are really in the forefront in many ways uh, to really build the concept of collective leadership by engaging young people, drawing from their skills and their thinking. And I think the same thing with the Obama Foundation. I believe that they have developed some really outstanding programs that are focused on youth leadership, and that also, engage adults in understanding how they can support youth leadership, but at the same time learn from the leadership that young people can bring to the efforts. So those are two organizations that I can think of that are doing great work.
I can also think of the Parent Leadership Institute in Connecticut doing really good work at a national level also.
Where is that located? You know?
It was founded in Connecticut,
Okay.
Parent Leadership Training Institute, but it's around. I was actually the coordinator for the Miami chapter.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So that they're focused on parent leadership in the schools and in the community.
Right.
Great.
They do trainings every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other examples of collective leadership or what we can do to improve the collective leadership in the work that we do?
I have a big issue with collective leadership at the community level, because usually I find myself going to meetings and it's always the same people, like where I live, and I don't see the real people. Where are the real people? It's always the question in my mind, the people that are being affected by it, by the decision. So I tend to kind of disengage because every meeting feels like the same meeting. Like I just keep going to the same meeting.
I can agree with Elizabeth. I sit on 10 boards, 2 governor appointed boards. They mostly are for children with disabilities. CBAC is Children Behavior Advisory Board. I'm on the DCF RAC boards, and it's the same thing for the last 3 years. I swear to God, I mean, the same material, same people. So when it gets to be collective, it's kind of hard because every agency has a report they want to submit, and then they submit it, but nothing's really done as far as policies and making changes in the community. That's just my own impression, and I've been doing it for 3 years since I've been here and consistently on the boards, and it's just a lot. I'm saying a lot of these meetings are 10 hours. I mean, 4 hours. I'm exaggerating. Like from 10 to 12. It used to be in person, but now they're like 3-hour meetings, and it's like back to back, back to back, back to back, and it's just like I really don't see progression in the community. I mean, so I can concur with Elizabeth. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean that right there, what you both are bringing up too, is back to Antonia's original point: is what are we doing, and how can we recruit more people to get more involved, right? So we're talking about young people, and then there's those everyday real people, right? What are some of the things that we could do? And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out. There are a couple of resources we have on our website for that. I could definitely share that with you all. If I don't do it right now, I'll try to put it. If I can't put it in the chat before our session is over, I'll definitely email you all, because I think you all are signed up and we'll have your emails on file. Is that true? Okay,
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So I did want to make sure to get this, to share that just in case. And anything else on collective leadership before we move on?
Just one thing, Sagacity, that I think is important is you have to be intentional about that. You have to really build the spaces for that and the practices. You have to be thoughtful because if you're working with not only young people, obviously you want to have the intergenerational framework as a way to build that space with young people, but also think in terms of immigrants, in terms of people with physical challenges, people with language, not having proficiency in the language. So really, the whole concept of collective leadership has to be about creating space. It's not a static concept. It's about creating space with everyone that is going to be part of the work, that they feel welcome, included, and that there are no barriers for them. So that's part of being a collective leadership. It's not just the training that you might do, but also how do you create those spaces.
And I'm glad that you added that, Val, because sometimes when I end up being at those meetings, I feel really uncomfortable because they're very cliquey. Like all those people are the same people that go from committee to committee. And sometimes I don't particularly feel welcome at that table.
Exactly. And what often happens is you get turned off and leave and don't participate.
Yeah.
And so it's always the same people then who are going to be the ones doing the work, as opposed to creating those spaces where new people can come in and bring great ideas and really scale the work. They can go out to bring even more people into the work.
Exactly.
So it is an organizing challenge, right, Sagasta? It's tied to organizing.
Yeah.
To organizing skills. Yeah.
Definitely. And that's one of the reasons why we go over, these type of issues with our organizing training that Everyday Democracy offers, is because that's a big thing, is just creating the space. Elizabeth mentioned earlier, you're seeing the same people over and over again, and they're not the real people. There's sort of a reason why, and that reason is related to why is it that Connecticut has all of these different towns. Only 3 different counties have a large population of people of color, et cetera, right? People are creating the space that they would like to be in, and they're letting you know who they don't want to have in that space, right? So if we're going to start getting into those spaces, we're going to have to start changing the culture in terms of, all right, look, it's again, Taylor had mentioned, we're asking people to put their money where they say that their values and belief system is. Then that's the same thing in terms of a lot of these different community groups and organizations and boards, et cetera. They'll put the word out and say, oh yeah, we're all about inclusion, we're all about diversity, whatever have you. But then they run their meetings with Robert's Rules of Order. They do everything the way they've been doing it for the last 30 years, whatever have you. So now you're not creating a space to accommodate the people that you say you want there, right? So some of us have to start invading those spaces. Forgive my violent language, but some of us have to start being in those spaces and being able to share, hey, these are some alternative ways. If we really want to widen the net, then let's really be about doing that, and also, I will say this, if you are going to do that, try to bring an ally or 2 with you. So then that way you're not all alone in those spaces. Because Elizabeth, I've been there myself, where you walk into those rooms, they're, very white, very suit and tie, very formal. And you're like, even though I know I should be here to represent for my people, it gets difficult. Like Val said, if you do that for 6 months, like how draining is that, Definitely. So I do want to big that up and give the word of encouragement, but also say, build that network within yourself, with your group, so then that way you don't feel so alone when you're out there. Definitely. And I'll jump to our last one, which is sustainability. And what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we have caring communities that are enduring? How do we sustain our community actions, right? A couple of you all, mentioned the importance of giving testimony. That's super big, right? I've testified a few times myself in the past, and do some work with the ACLU and whatnot to try to make sure, they do a lot. The work I've done with them has been more about our reentry and whatnot, but other ideas in terms of sustainability, things that we can do, practices that, or even if it's something that you heard of, right?
Okay, can I ask a question? I know that
Yes, ma'am.
Taylor it. I know the KTP did it. It was legislative training. I think it's really important to offer legislative training to get people to understand it, so it's not as intimidating, and then get them through the process. And I'm trying to find a group that will do that. I'm saying, I know that money's an issue, but I think that with the training to understand the concept and getting them involved, how a bill's made and how a bill's implemented, I think that we can really make a difference. And I think that and the whole process of it and how to navigate the system. That's really, really important. Really, really important. And that would be a part of the sustaining, people understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I know Val, you all did I don't know if it already happened, right? The one about testifying.
Yeah, we did a month or two ago, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there is an organization called Connecticut Public Affairs Network, and they have a series of videos on testifying at public hearings, but also a lot of videos about the legislative process in Connecticut. Very detailed videos. There's about 10 to 12 of them. So I encourage you to go to Connecticut Public Affairs, and it used to be called CTN, Connecticut Network. Actually, go to that, CTN, Connecticut Network, and they have it in their website. They have resources, and they have a toolkit that includes these videos and some other materials that you can use. And you can do a training, yourself, whether it be for young people or for, a diverse group of people, and structure the modules based on what they have there, because they start talking about what is the legislature, right? How, what are the roles of legislators? How does a bill become a law? What input can citizens have, individuals have on the legislative process, the committees? I mean, it explains everything. It's really, really a wonderful research. And again, you could find it in the Connecticut Network, CTN. And if you go to Google, put CTN Toolkit, and you should be able to find some good materials there.
Thanks, Val. We were trying to figure out how to do that, my partner and I, because we think it's really important for the community, all ages, to learn how to do this, because a lot of people just don't know.
Absolutely.
Definitely. That's such a huge piece, right? Because but one thing I've noticed is, as I've, sort of grown in my role and what the work I do in community work is having a grasp of that. Like, there's certain people who have it, and there's a lot of us who don't, and even me personally, like, if someone calls me, I was like, hey, so guys, why don't you come out and do this or do X, Y, and Z? I'd be like, all right, cool. I'm doing that now, mostly because you just invited me. But if someone was to ask me to describe, certain processes that happen in legislation, how things happen and whatnot, am I going to be able to actually break it down? No, I don't think so. So having more people be able to do that is definitely a plus. Other ideas, thoughts?
Do we have a recording of the event with Paul Scaff that we did?
We do actually, yeah, and it's and I think, Antonia, you participated in that one. I'm trying to remember, or maybe
yes, I did. The testifying part, I'm saying, is good, but what happens before that is more.
Before that, yes,
yeah.
of course.
I think that they combine each piece of it, because a lot of people don't even know the first part of the bill. Like the bill, how long it stays in in discovery or markup, whatever. Where does it go from there? How can a bill be raised? All that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And it's just, I just think it's so important. I don't know everything myself. I want to let you know that, but I follow along when I have to. But I just think that it would better help if people knew the whole legislating process.
Right. Yeah. And Paul Scaff was the person who developed, I believe, or was key to developing those videos and that toolkit. So check CTN Toolkit, Connecticut Network, and you can, as I mentioned, you can review those videos and then think of how you can set them up in modules, and maybe even invite some folks. You could even invite your legislator, your state representative. They will love that. Invite them to. All you need to do is send them an email. Many of them, in fact, most of them would welcome that opportunity, because for them, it's an opportunity to connect with the constituents. Of course, they think of it in terms of getting votes. We know that. But at the same time, they get to really connect with you and have constituents ask questions about the process and all that, and how they can be more engaged. So absolutely, encourage people to contact their legislators. That's what they're there for. We pay for them. We pay their salaries. So they should be held accountable, Yeah.
Keen. Any other thoughts? Elizabeth, are you trying to speak?
Yeah, sustainability. Can you break that down for us a little more so we can give you more ideas?
Oh yeah, definitely. So sustainability, I'll try to give a super quick and dirty, is in terms of what's the long-term effects? How do we keep ourselves going, right? So not just, doing something short term, right? So as Antonia mentioned, right, even if we do something in terms of educating people on the legislative process, right? How do we not just educate people on legislation over the next 3 months and just do an event and do that? How are we going to do that for people who are interested in it 6 months from now? People are interested in it 5 years from now. That's what I mean by sustainability. How do we figure out what's the best practices, what's working well? How do we make changes to keep it, going well? And one of the things I think I'd like to say is when I'm doing work is, this system of racism and oppression was not built on accident. It was not built overnight. It took many years, and they refined the systems, they refined the techniques. Now us on the other side, what's our long-term goal? How are we going to sort of perfect our way of doing things? Because that's the only way it can, combat it. Because again, and I hate to bring this up, but, we've seen the pushback from what happened in Georgia regarding voting. They knew what to do once we had a lot of people come out in Georgia to vote. So it's like, okay, well, let's make it more difficult now. It's things like that. They were thinking more long-term.
An important part of sustainability is not letting go, not quitting. And bringing more people into the work. That means building relationships, really meaningful relationships that will go a long way, and also making sure that everybody has a chance to build collective leadership. That way, not everything will fall on the same small group of people. Everyone will be part of the leadership, decision making, and the activism. So it's about bringing more and more people to the table, including them, creating the space for their voices, and for them to feel that they're contributing. So it's really building a movement in many ways. To sustain something, you need to build a movement. It can be small, but then it can eventually grow and become a mass movement.
Definitely. And, to speak about that mass movement, I mean, regardless of where anybody stands on Black Lives Matter and what it means and, its cultural significance for us right now, I remember when, who was running when Hillary Clinton was running the first time, right? I remember it's the Democratic primary, right? So they're all doing their debate. And there was a question that said, is it Black Lives Matter or do all lives matter? Now, these are the Democrats, right? The quote unquote left. And they were struggling with whether or not they should say on national television, Black Lives Matter. Now, fast forward to now, my insurance company gave me an email this summer saying we stand with Black lives. How many different Black Lives Matter flags have you seen in front of white people's houses, commercials, etc.? So thinking of where we were 8 years ago to where we are now as a country, where now we're actually able to say Black Lives Matter. Are we practicing it? No, but we're able to say it out loud. Just that. So yes, definitely valid. It's about how we build steam into that movement.
I also think an important part of sustainability is rest, because you can't do it all the whole time. Either whether it's a big group, a small group, you individually, it doesn't matter. You can't run at 100% all the time. We will fall apart. So I think by what Val said, having, a team of people and, having close allies, but then having, a movement allows, me to take a rest where Zoya can do the next, right? You're allowed to continue to push without having to leave your self-care and your joy behind too, because this work is really tough. And it, and there are moments where resistance and just all of that, resistance or joy is resistance in a lot of movements too.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important factor of sustainability is rest, so that you can continue the next day.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Taylor, because every time I look at myself in the mirror, I just turned 63, right? And this speaks to the importance of youth leadership and collective leadership and intergenerational equity, because younger people have more energy, at least generally speaking, than people like me. And how is that generation going to really take the torch and run it, the next leg, if you will, of the torch, if we're not creating those spaces to make them feel that they're part of this? That we trust them, that we are willing to work with them and be collectively in the leadership to that. Because at some point, I'm going to have to retire. Not Sagasti, because Sagasti is very young, of course.
Young at heart. That's why I'm watching Marvel comic book movies.
But I'm gonna be retiring very soon, at some point, I guess. And so it's the young people. So we have to think about sustainability in terms of understanding that for the most part, historically, older people have created barriers for young people to be part of the work, and only a few have. But we need to change that. We need to be porous. We need to be able to create the spaces so that young people can take on the baton, if you will, and move forward. When we move out, we have a fresh army or core of young leaders who can sustain the work. It's a generational enterprise as well.
Definitely. So before we do continue on this, I do want to throw some shade towards Taylor for calling me out about not giving myself any rest. So I don't appreciate you for doing that, but we're going to continue the conversation anyway. So any other thoughts on sustainability? Ideas and certain practices, like the self-care one, to me just jumped out. I mean, all jokes aside, right? That's very, very real. You know, that's the reason why Antonio is on 3 different boards, right? That's the reason why, you know, Elizabeth going to all these different meetings and it's the same people, et cetera, right? Feeling as though we have to represent, we have to step up and step out. So that's very big in terms of sustainability. But any other ideas?
I also think that you have to focus on a few. You can't be everywhere, right? So you have to kind of pick what you're passionate about and try to, I don't know, maybe make a dent in those sub areas.
Yes.
When I think of sustainability too, I think of commitment. Like those 2 words really go hand in hand for me. So if like a program or any institution or anything is like, we're going to run a pilot program, like, no, write it into your policies. Like, this is now what we're going to do. It's not going to be a pilot. Like, we know what the data is going to show, right? Like, we know that we need this support. We know that there's already data out there. Like, we don't need to run. I guess like that's where I get frustrated. Like if you really want sustainability, like it's going to be written into your bylaws or it's going to be written into your procedures. Like it's going to show up from now on.
Mm-hmm. There's that budget piece again. Right.
But I do think that you have to find a way to feel the passion because the work is so hard that, I mean, there are many days that I wake up and I honestly, I ask myself, how much longer can I be a teacher? The past year has literally almost killed us all. I mean, so I don't know how to communicate that, but like you have to find ways to rest and also find the fuel somehow because it gets very hard. Sometimes I just want to get a job that, I don't know, like an easy job. Some mornings I just wake up and I'm like, I want to be a cashier somewhere.
Well, you know, it's funny. I will say this too about that. I don't know. I'm not even sure if are easy jobs that
You're
exist.
right.
You know what I mean? Right. Because you just never know, you know, because every different field, because I've had a very interesting life, so I've had many different jobs and whatnot, but yeah, I can't say that I've worked an easy job. You know, right. Everything has its own different struggles. So because to your point though, I agree. There's times when I'm like, geez, you know, I have to write this report, then I have to do this training, then I have to do that, and it's like, man, if I could just find something where, you know, I'm making decent money, but not, it doesn't take everything out of me. And then, of course, there's always the, you know, bumping into somebody, whether it be pre-COVID at a conference or, you know, somebody, you know, someone sends you an email about something that you're interested in, and now you're joining in another group, you know, so now you're doing something new. And it's so I definitely relate to that. But yeah, if anybody does find out that there are any job opportunities that are easy, please shoot them my way. I'm just playing. I love everybody democracy.
But you know, one thing that just because I know we're moving to the next topic, and it connects with self-care. Most people who know me, they know that I like to joke around a little bit, so I'm always throwing a joke here or there. Like Sagacity knows already. Richard Frieder, he and I are always joking. It's about humor. It's about bringing humor into the work you're doing, and it eases the tension and the stress. Saul Alinsky, who is one of the greatest theories of organizing, said that one of the key elements of being a good organizer and to sustain yourself and sustain the work is to have humor, to have a good sense of humor, and to not let things get, not take yourself so seriously, but also the work. Make sure you make space for humor, for laughter, for enjoyment, for celebration, and that is so important. It's part of self-care.
Definitely. So we are sort of nearing our end, and this was our last principle was sustainability. So before we finish up, really quickly, I wanted to share the notes with you all. So if you aren't able to see the Google Doc, or even if you are able to have it, I will try to make sure we get this to you. I'm going to clean it up, make sure that there's not too many spelling errors in there. But we are going to make sure you have that, because one of the things that I like doing, one of the reasons why I like doing what I do, is sharing ideas and thoughts with one another. Because you may read this, once when we send it out via email or whatever have you, but you still have the thoughts in your head. So when you start thinking about whatever your next projects are, how are we going to think about, inviting more youth in? The importance of, learning real life skills that aren't taught in class, right? Like, that's big, right? Thinking of our wins, the things that we are able to do, and being mindful of things that need to be improved, keep it in mind. So next time we're talking about going to testify, when we invite people, there was the webinar we did a little while ago that we had talked about, right? How are we even inviting people and letting them know what they have to do to testify, right? And getting involved in the legislative process. So keeping all of these different things in mind. And that's why I like doing workshops like this, where we're all sharing ideas with one another, learning from one another, and having a conversation. Because like I said earlier on, and like we all are starting to say now, is this is all about relationships. A lot of the work is relationships, So with that being said, I am going to begin to wrap up. So my piece of all of this and what I wanted to share with you all, we're good with that and we're done with that. But Antonia did bring up recruiting young people and the difficulty with that. So I wanted to give a little bit of space and time for ideas and thoughts to possibly help in terms of recruitment.
I think, speaking as a young person, one of the biggest things that you can do is to talk and advocate for issues that are concerning young people and really bringing those to the forefront of your discussion. I think you mentioned earlier that you were talking about legislation, things that affect young people that they might not be so aware of. And while that is still super important, I think that if you're going to bring people to the table, you have to listen to what their immediate concerns are right now and the issues that are taking up the most of their attention. Because someone who's not familiar with that work isn't going to start or join into that work on an issue that they know nothing about. So things like environmentalism, things like, civic rights and issues like that are really at the forefront of young people's minds right now are so important to, pay attention to and to bring to the table if you're trying to recruit those young minds and have those conversations.
Also, Zoya, I want to, piggyback off that is, like you mentioned, not only are the issues in front, but the way you frame the issues are really important, because like zoning and housing laws are so important in the state of Connecticut, like you mentioned, Antonio. Like the way that, like, if you were to put a redlining map over Connecticut, it would show you exactly what you stated, right? That there are only 3 counties in this state that basically have anybody of color. Like that is a very apparent fact in the state. So I think, like, while zoning itself, the title might sound really boring and nitty gritty, I think the way that you can utilize how it impacts people and like use that more of like an emotional and like relational conversation, then sometimes like the nitty gritty is really easy to get lost in or to get intimidated by, or just be like, this is just a lot of stuff that like I can't fix it all and it's overwhelming and I don't want to be a part of it. Where I think, by not only focusing on issues, that young people immediately care about, but also, like you said, like this is stuff that is affecting them, and you do care about young individuals, and you are trying, to like continuously build an equitable life for them. And I think by using, what you share with us, I think that framework would be really helpful for young people to hear, is like, wow, like zoning itself might be kind of boring, but it's really important because it relates to all these other issues that I care about.
And I think that for me, I'm saying I do both. I do the basic, this is what it is, but then I break it down. And the biggest piece is that everybody's fleeing Connecticut. I'm saying most people that are fleeing Connecticut are of other races, and that's because it's too expensive. There's not multiple dwellings in the towns and cities. I mean, the other towns or whatever. So those people have like access to move to New York and Boston and live in a shoebox because there's more to do there. Whereas more of the Black people are staying because it's kind of like they're stuck here. So I think that when I explain this to people, like college students aren't staying, they're leaving. You know what I'm saying? Because Connecticut to them is boring, and not only that, it's too expensive. So that's when it really impacts younger people. So generationally, I'm saying if it's affecting college students and they're leaving, who's really going to be left here? To pass on the baton, like Val said. And so that's how I bring it to them. Like, it doesn't just affect minorities in the suburbs, is affecting you as well, other races as well too, because those students that want to get a apartment or a condo can't get them because all those towns are single dwelling houses. So if you want to buy a house, you can go to any community, but if you want to live in something more affordable, it's not there for anybody.
Hi, Antonia. My name is Jamil. I work in communications here at Everyday Democracy. And do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about your recruitment strategy?
Sure.
In terms of your strategy, have you targeted? I heard you say that you hand out flyers. You've done those sorts of things before as well, right? Have you targeted those types of recruitment strategies to specific neighborhoods or areas? Have it kind of been like, what's been your strategy for targeting those?
So let me just explain something to you. I've been doing this for 3 years. And so before COVID, I had already laid a foundation. And then I have other people who have more access to like the university. So like, for instance, New Haven, I have somebody that goes to the universities there, whatever. We also email a lot since COVID. So the heads of whatever who have assured us that they're connecting with the youth. So COVID has put a big, dampen on a lot of our outreach. However, we use the electronic way to get the information to them. When it comes to the social media, we have a page. I have my own personal page, and then my partner has Twitter, and there's also Clubhouse. So we're on every platform there is to reach out with people. So foundationally, it was like boots to the ground. Basically, it was like in the community. I'm saying, passing out flyers, talking to people, hitting up the colleges, I'm saying, the student centers. So we've done that in the past.
I guess what I mean more like is kind of like where specifically, because if
we have a list of all the organizations and all the people that we've been in contact with. We keep an email chain. So any university, Southern Southeast University, CCSU, Trinity, any college campus, my other person has been there and passed out flyers. When it comes to organization, Black Coalition, NAACP, the Urban League, I have relationships with them. What else? All the religious leaders, I'm saying, the fraternities. I mean, so we have really contacted people. And that's why we're not understanding why more people are involved, not just youth, but more people not involved, period. So I have a list of people who I'm in contact with. Yeah.
Okay. Because a thought that I had is a lot of times the unfortunate truth is that young people just aren't interested in these things that we're talking about, right? It's just a thing that you start to learn to care about later. If it's possible, what could be a potential strategy is just to kind of like go through that list again, like one place at a time, right? And then it's kind of like, okay, we've saturated this particular area, this particular college, this particular social media channel right now, right? And we just see that, you know what, out of all these people, we got one or two people to show up. That's just that place, and it's done, right? So then you don't keep running over like, well, we've talked to 10 million people. Why is no one answering? We can at least say we talked to these 1,000 people. These 1,000 people just aren't interested. Now we move on to the next 1,000. It might be helpful to take it a little bit smaller in that way, so that you can just rule out the people who aren't interested and keep your thing moving to the next group that might be.
Right. So we saturated like every community, Hartford, New Britain, Waterbury, New Haven, Bridgeport, Stanford. And then that's just by general population. And then we went back and we actually had him go to the different universities and stuff. Then I actually worked with all the different Black organizations and religious leaders. So we at this point, we're just like, we don't know who's interested in what. And so I just wanted to join this to tell the youth that we're very much, engaging. We're very much welcome them. We just want to make sure their voices are heard, because when these bills get passed and the task force get created, because we're asking for a task force on 6662, specifically for Black American descendants of slavery, and why Black people have been marginally discriminated against since slavery, and how that affects other Black groups. So we're asking for a task force. And when that task force comes, we want youth to be on it. We want people in the community to be on it. And so if I can't get them to engage and get them to sign on, then they miss the mark. And that's not what I want.
Definitely. And also too, let's also, because we are coming to time and the facilitator in me is like, all right, wrap up time, da 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 da.
Yep.
So I
fine.
do want to be 100% clear. So Antonio, but from hearing you speak, I already have a couple of ideas and a couple of people I want to connect you to, specifically around the disabilities thing, but then also with recruiting young people and working with young people, because there's stuff that I've done with young people. It's one of the things I love doing is working with like, high school students, young 20s and whatnot. So there are certain organizations, I mean, I'm sure you've already contacted them, but one of the big things I think is, a lot of times people are stuck in that, this is the program or projects we work on in the fall. This is the program or project we work on in the summer. And that's where their focus is, right? So sort of aligning whatever you're doing with their program that they got going on, and then sort of inviting the younger people in that program or project to say, oh, we're also doing this. Would you like to be involved with this? But coming to them and say, hey, we got this, that, and third going on, that may be an issue. But yeah, we'll definitely continue the conversation with one another. I think this is a great opportunity for us to stay connected with one another.
And I'll put my chats to you guys. Great. I mean, if you have any information you want to follow me, I'll do that.
Great. That's
really
beautiful. And but before I go, Jamil, you've been there the whole time under Naisha, man. I didn't even know you were here. You could have spoken up.
I thought it was Naisha too.
Yeah, me too. I was like, Naisha is certainly quiet.
Wait, am I on Naisha's? Oh, well,
right.
Well, I'll just hit observe.
Like, okay.
I'll just hit observe anyway.
Is he Jamal?
Jamil.
I'm sorry. When you like, are you Jamil or you Aisha?
All right, that explains that. All right, hi everybody.
All right.
Thank you. So Sagacity, one last thing, just for Antonia. I used to work in higher education, and I worked. In fact, before I came to work at Everyday Democracy, I worked at Trinity College for 6 years as the director of community service and civic engagement, and I worked with about 15 to 20 different student organizations. The student of color organizations are often very good to contact directly. You can contact them through the Student Affairs Office or the Campus Life Office, but if you can contact them directly and build relationships with them, and it goes back to what someone was saying just now about that we only think of them coming to work on our project, when in fact we could build relationships with them and help them on projects they're doing as a way to show them that you're willing to interact with them and have a relationship. That's what I found. The organizations that do that are the most successful in keeping them engaged long term, because they have built relationships with them. And of course, working with college students is challenging because some of them live on campus, but then they leave for spring break. In the summer, they disappear. So it's really about trying to keep those that are most engaged connected. And the way to do that is to those relationships that you build year round.
Definitely. So I'll pass it off to Val to wrap us up and whatnot. But before that, I do want to say thank you all for participating. I love the conversation. Hopefully this was meaningful for you. Hope you got something out of it, learned something out of it, and just got a chance to have your voice heard, right, and connect with one another. So that's a really big part of our work. So thanks again. And I'm going to keep on keeping on. I know y'all going to keep on keeping on.
So Sagacity, thank you so much. This was a really interesting and enjoyable, workshop. I'm sure I think we all enjoyed it tremendously and learned so much from you. And we want to thank you for spending your time with us here today. Zoya, you have an announcement, I think?
Yes, I just put a survey link in the chat. It's really quick. It should only take you about 2 minutes max. Just if you could give us some feedback about how this training went, so that way that we can structure our future trainings and make sure that we're doing the best that we can. So yeah, if you can just take a few minutes now, and then Val's going to introduce the summit that we have planned for next month. And so Val, if you want to give a few details about that.
Yes, thank you, Zoya. As you fill out the survey, make sure you click on that and We will keep the meeting going for a few minutes after it ends so that you have a chance to copy it, or if you can click on it right now, that way you'll have it on your browser and we don't have to worry about closing the meeting. But yes, we are going to have our 2021 Connecticut Civic Ambassador Summit. As those of you who have been Civic Ambassadors for a while, remember we did one in 2019, December of 2019. We didn't do one last year because of COVID-19. However, we're doing one on Saturday, April 24th at 12 noon on Zoom. It's going to be a virtual Civic Ambassador Summit. I'm putting the link right now in the chat room where you can go and get more information on the Facebook event page. It also has the registration link where you can register. This summit is open to the public, but we really encourage those of you who are not Civic Ambassadors to please sign up, because we will give priority, unfortunately, to Civic Ambassadors. And so if you want to participate, it's a free event. The only price you pay is that you have to sign up to become a Civic Ambassador, which is free also. So you get, everything is free, but you gotta sign up. And you'll be able to then participate in other kinds of webinars, like the excellent webinar that we had today, the one that we did a month or two ago on testifying in public hearings. We did one in the fall on the Electoral College, and then another one on civic engagement. And at the Summit, Sagacity will be joining us. He will be doing an organizing training for the Civic Ambassador. So he's outstanding, and you don't want to miss that training. That's a really good training. And also we have a great keynote speaker, Rashad Hawkins, who is an award-winning organizer, community organizer, who has worked a lot with young people, with youth, and on racial equity issues. The theme of the summit is civic leadership and organizing for equitable change. We're going to focus a lot on racial equity. We have a great panel facilitated by Professor Bilal Sekou and a group of outstanding panelists who are going to talk about how institutional and systemic racism has impacted communities of color in the areas of criminal justice, housing and education, and healthcare. And they're going to be bringing perspectives on how policies and practices rooted on racism, has led to disparate outcomes for people of color. And they're going to examine that and also offer strategies for organizing that incorporates a racial equity lens into the effort. So don't miss the summit. Click on the survey, but also click on this Facebook page, event page, because you'll be able to then learn more about the summit and register for it. Okay, so again, thank you everyone, Sagacity and Zoya, and all of you for participating. Any last questions before we close? Okay, so again, thank you, Sagacity. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.